The biting November wind whipped through the city's narrow alleys, carrying with it the scent of rain and despair. Alara clutched her worn trench coat tighter, the thin fabric doing little to ward off the chill that had seeped into her bones. Her shift at the dilapidated diner had just ended, leaving her with barely enough tips to cover bus fare, let alone the increasingly overdue rent for her cramped studio apartment. Every step she took echoed the emptiness in her stomach and the growing dread in her heart. She wasn't running from anything tangible, but the invisible chains of her circumstances felt heavier with each passing day. The city, usually a vibrant tapestry of lights and sounds, now felt like a cold, indifferent monster, ready to swallow her whole. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. Just as she turned a corner into a particularly dim street, a sudden flash of headlights blinded her. A sleek, obsidian black sedan, a model she couldn't even identify, screeched to a halt mere feet from her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. Before she could react, the passenger door swung open. A figure, tall and impeccably dressed, emerged from the shadows. His face was a chiseled mask of authority, eyes dark and intense, scanning the street with an unnerving calm. He was undeniably handsome, in a severe, almost dangerous way, but his presence radiated an aura of power that sent a shiver down her spine, far colder than the wind. "Get in," he commanded, his voice a low, resonant baritone, laced with an accent she couldn't quite place. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Alara stood frozen, her mind racing. Who was this man? And why was he speaking to her? Her routine had been a monotonous loop for years, diner, apartment, repeat. She rarely ventured beyond her immediate neighborhood, a patchwork of struggling businesses and aging brownstones. The closest she'd come to danger was a spilled tray of coffee or a disgruntled customer. This man, with his expensive suit and predatory gaze, was from a different world entirely. His name, she would later learn, was Kian. Kian Min. He was a force of nature, a silent storm in human form. His eyes, she noticed now, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher, a deep, ancient sadness, perhaps, or a relentless ambition. She swallowed hard, her voice catching in her throat. I don't know you, she managed, her words barely audible above the wind's howl. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips. You will, he stated, his gaze unwavering, magnetic. He made no move towards her, yet his presence felt overwhelming, a heavy weight in the cold night air. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, an invisible thread connecting them against her will. He was danger, wrapped in charisma. He was everything she should run from, yet something held her captive, a strange curiosity warring with her primal fear. But she still didn't know who he truly was. The next evening, the chill was even more profound, and Alara found herself walking the same route, a perverse sense of inevitability guiding her. She had tried to dismiss the encounter as a strange dream, a trick of her exhausted mind. But the image of Kian's face, those piercing eyes, had haunted her every waking moment. This time, he was waiting. The black sedan was parked discreetly under a flickering street lamp, a silent predator in the urban jungle. As she approached, the window glided down, revealing Kian's profile, sharp and unyielding. My name is Kian, he said, his voice smoother now, less of a command, more of an invitation. And you, Alara, are in trouble. Her breath hitched. How did he know her name? A cold dread seeped into her, confirming her worst suspicions. This wasn't a random encounter. What do you mean, she stammered, her heart beginning its frantic rhythm once more. He finally stepped out of the car, his height even more imposing up close. He held out a single, folded newspaper clipping. Your landlord, he began, his voice dropping to a near whisper, owes a significant debt. A debt that, unfortunately for you, has now been transferred. Her eyes scanned the article, her blood turning to ice. A small-time loan shark, now bankrupt, his assets absorbed by a larger, more menacing entity. The name of that entity wasn't in the paper, but she felt its shadow loom over her, a tangible threat. She looked up at Kian, her mind reeling. He wasn't just some wealthy stranger. He was connected. Deeply connected. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He was part of that world, the one she'd only seen in movies, the one that dealt in debts and power and fear. He was a mafia boss. The air grew thick with unspoken meaning. He hadn't just appeared, he had chosen her. And now, she was inexplicably entangled in his world. He wanted her close, but for what? Reason? You have nowhere to go, he stated, his gaze softening, almost imperceptibly. And I have a proposition. His words, though laced with a hint of menace, also held a strange comfort, a promise of protection in a world suddenly turned hostile. The dangerous magnetism that had pulled her in before now intensified, a potent cocktail of fear and an undeniable, forbidden curiosity. He revealed only a fraction of why he was extending this offer. Your landlord's debt is complicated. You are a part of the collateral. But I see a solution that benefits us both. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I require your assistance. And in return, you will be safe. Under my protection. The idea was terrifying, unthinkable. But as she looked around at the dark, desolate street, the alternative seemed even bleaker. She was alone, vulnerable. Alara's mind raced, a whirlwind of fear and a burgeoning, unwelcome fascination. The cold reality of her situation pressed in, suffocating her. Her landlord, a man she barely knew beyond the monthly exchange of rent, had unknowingly signed away her peace, her future. And Kian, this formidable, enigmatic man, now held the reins. He stood before her, a dark silhouette against the city lights, an anchor in a suddenly turbulent sea. His offer was a gilded cage, she knew, but the bars seemed less menacing than the open expanse of a city that had just declared war on her existence. What kind of assistance, she managed, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the pounding in her chest. The word collateral echoed in her mind, chilling her to the bone. Kian's lips curved into a subtle, almost imperceptible smile, a flash of something akin to satisfaction. Discretion. Observation. Your unique perspective, Alara, is valuable. You blend in, you see things others overlook. And in my world, information is currency. He didn't elaborate, leaving a tantalizing void of unanswered questions that only deepened her intrigue. He spoke of discretion, yet his presence was anything but discreet, radiating an undeniable power that drew all eyes. She stared at him, trying to read the unreadable depths of his eyes. Was he truly offering protection, or was this a more elaborate trap? Her instincts screamed caution, yet a strange, almost reckless part of her yearned for the security he implicitly promised. And if I refuse? She asked, her voice gaining a surprising edge of defiance. His gaze sharpened, a flicker of warning passing through his dark eyes. Refusal, Alara, is not an option you can afford. The words were soft, yet held the weight of an unbreakable decree. He opened the back door of the sleek sedan, the interior a plush sanctuary from the biting wind. Get in. We have much to discuss. She hesitated for only a moment, the cold seeping deeper into her, a tangible reminder of her precarious position. With a sigh that carried the weight of her surrender, she slid into the luxurious leather seat. The door clicked shut, sealing her fate, for now, within the confines of Kian Min's world. The scent of expensive cologne and something subtly earthy, like rich soil after a storm, filled her senses, a potent, intoxicating mix. The car moved silently through the city streets, a phantom gliding through the night. Alara watched the familiar urban landscape blur past, feeling an unnerving disconnect. She was still in her city, yet she was no longer of it. Kian sat beside her, his presence a heavy, silent force. He didn't speak, allowing the silence to stretch, to build a palpable tension between them. His profile was etched in the dim light filtering through the windows, a steady and controlled power. She found herself stealing glances at him, noticing the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his fingers, long and elegant, rested on his knee. He was a paradox, a man of immense power who moved with a quiet, almost predatory grace. You're wondering what this entails, he finally stated, his voice cutting through the silence, making her jump slightly. He hadn't looked at her, yet he knew exactly what she was thinking. It's simple. You'll live in one of my properties. You'll have what you need. And occasionally, I'll ask you to observe. To listen. To be my eyes and ears where I cannot be. He paused, turning to face her fully, his gaze intense, unwavering. No violence. No direct involvement. Just presence. And in return, your debt is cleared. Your safety guaranteed. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. And if I see something I shouldn't? If I hear something dangerous? A faint, almost predatory smile touched his lips. Then you tell me. And I handle it. There was an implicit threat in his words, a clear demarcation of power. He was the protector, the enforcer, and she was merely a piece on his chessboard. Yet, the thought of being truly safe, truly protected, was a siren song to her weary soul. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. The car pulled up to a towering skyscraper, its glass facade reflecting the city lights like scattered diamonds. This was a different world entirely from her dingy apartment. They ascended in a private elevator, the ascent silent and swift, carrying her further and further from her old life. The penthouse apartment was vast, minimalist, yet exuded an undeniable sense of luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city, a glittering tapestry of lights stretching to the horizon. It felt like stepping into another dimension. Kian led her to a spacious bedroom, a stark contrast to the rest of the apartment with its softer lighting and warmer tones. This will be your room, he said, his voice softer than before, almost considerate. You'll have everything you need. Clothes, toiletries. Consider this your new beginning. He gestured to a walk-in closet, revealing racks of designer clothes, all in her size. It was overwhelming, a dizzying display of wealth she couldn't comprehend. Why me? She asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. There must be countless others who could do this for you. He turned, his dark eyes meeting hers, holding a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher, a hint of vulnerability, perhaps, or a deep-seated loneliness. Because you don't belong in this world, Alara. And that, paradoxically, makes you the perfect asset. You see things with fresh eyes. Untainted by cynicism. He took a step closer, and the air around them crackled with an undeniable, potent chemistry. Her breath hitched. He was so close she could feel the subtle warmth radiating from him, smell the intoxicating scent that was uniquely his. His proximity was a physical force, pulling her in, even as her mind screamed for her to retreat. He was danger, wrapped in an alluring mystery, and she was a moth drawn to his flame. He raised a hand, his long fingers hovering just inches from her cheek, a silent question in his gaze. Every nerve ending in her body hummed with a heightened awareness. The unspoken tension between them was a tangible thing, a delicate thread stretched taut, threatening to snap. She held her breath, mesmerized by the intensity in his eyes, a depth that seemed to hold untold stories and unyielding resolve. You are different, Alara, he finally murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her, sending shivers down her spine. The words were a revelation, an acknowledgement of the strange connection that had formed between them in the cold, unforgiving streets of the city. He didn't touch her, yet his presence was an embrace, a silent promise of something she couldn't quite name. It was a moment suspended in time, fragile and potent. The sudden chime of his phone shattered the fragile intimacy, pulling him back from the precipice of their unspoken connection. He retracted his hand, the subtle shift in his demeanor like a physical chill. The mask of the formidable boss settled back into place, his eyes losing their momentary softness, becoming once more unreadable, distant. I have a meeting, he stated, his voice devoid of the earlier warmth. Make yourself comfortable. Anything you need, ask my assistant, Lena. She'll be here in the morning. With that, he turned, a silent, imposing figure, and exited the room, leaving Alara alone in the vast, luxurious space. The echoes of his words, of his proximity, still lingered in the air, a phantom touch on her skin. She looked around the opulent room, a stark contrast to the life she had known just hours before. This wasn't just a new beginning, it was an entirely new existence. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand. Yet a part of her, a foolish, hopeful part, wondered if Key and Min saw something more in her than just an asset. The following days were a blur of adjustment. Lena, a woman of impeccable efficiency and quiet strength, appeared promptly each morning, ensuring Alara had everything she needed. Designer clothes filled her closet, gourmet meals were delivered, and the city, once a source of dread, now lay sprawled beneath her penthouse window, a breathtaking, glittering spectacle. But the luxury felt like a gilded cage. Kian was a constant, unsettling presence, even when he wasn't physically there. His influence permeated every aspect of her new life. He would appear unexpectedly, sometimes late at night, sometimes in the early hours of the morning, his visits brief, intense, and always leaving her with a sense of unease and a strange, undeniable longing. Their conversations were often cryptic, punctuated by long silences. He would ask her about her observations, about the subtle shifts in the city's undercurrents, about the people she'd seen Lena interact with, the low-level operatives who occasionally came to the penthouse. Alara, with her sharp mind and keen observational skills, found herself surprisingly adept at this new role. She noticed the nuances in Lena's tone when discussing certain names, the guarded expressions of the men who came and went, the unspoken anxieties that rippled through Kian's inner circle. She relayed these observations to him, her words concise and to the point. He would listen, his dark eyes fixed on her, absorbing every detail, a silent intensity radiating from him. One evening, a week into her new life, Kian summoned her to his private study, a room dominated by dark wood, leather, and a wall of books that seemed to stretch endlessly. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and something subtly masculine, a scent that had begun to become intimately familiar. He was seated behind a massive desk, a single lamp casting long shadows across his face, accentuating the sharp angles of his jaw. He looked tired, a faint stubble darkening his chin, but his eyes, though weary, still held their formidable intensity. "There's a situation," he began, his voice low, devoid of emotion. "A rival faction is attempting to gain a foothold in the North End. They're reckless, disruptive." He paused, his gaze meeting hers, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "They've been targeting my people." Alara felt a chill creep up her spine. This was the first time he had spoken so directly about the dangers of his world, about the violence that simmered beneath the city's surface. It was a stark reminder of the reality she had been pulled into. "What does this have to do with me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his gaze unwavering. "They're looking for weaknesses. For leverage. And unfortunately, Alara, your sudden appearance in my orbit has not gone unnoticed." Her blood ran cold. She was a target. Not just a pawn, but a potential casualty. The gilded cage suddenly felt like a trap, its bars closing in around her. "You mean, they know about me?" A muscle in his jaw twitched. "They know I have someone new under my protection. Someone unexpected." He rose from his chair, walking around the desk to stand before her. His height was even more imposing up close, his presence radiating a protective intensity that both terrified and strangely comforted her. "This is where your discretion becomes paramount. You must not leave this penthouse without my direct instruction. Do you understand?" It wasn't a question. It was an order, laced with an undeniable concern that surprised her. He was not just protecting his asset, he was protecting her. The realization sent a strange warmth through her, a defiance against the fear that threatened to consume her. "I understand," she said, her voice firm. A faint, almost imperceptible nod from Kian acknowledged her compliance. He reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder, a gesture that spoke of both restraint and a powerful urge to offer comfort. The air between them thickened, charged with the unspoken tension of their precarious situation and the undeniable pull that had been growing between them. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a fleeting glimpse of something raw, something akin to fear, not for himself, but for her. It was a revelation, a crack in the formidable facade he presented to the world. "Good," he finally said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of the earlier hardness. "For now, stay close. Lena will ensure you have everything you need. This will pass. He turned, walking back to his desk, the moment of vulnerability gone, replaced by the familiar aura of controlled power. But Alara had seen it, that flicker of concern, that hint of a man burdened by responsibilities far beyond her comprehension. It planted a seed of curiosity, a desire to understand the man behind the formidable reputation. The days that followed were a testament to the escalating tension in the city. The penthouse, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fortress under siege. Kian's visits became more frequent, his presence a constant, reassuring anchor in the storm brewing outside. He would often sit with her in the evenings, the city lights twinkling below, not speaking much, but his silence was a comfortable presence, a shared weight. She found herself observing him, watching the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the way his eyes would sometimes drift to the panoramic view, a distant look in their depths. She saw the lines of fatigue etched around his eyes, the subtle clench of his jaw when he received a hushed phone call. He was fighting a war, and she was, however unwillingly, on the front lines with him. One particularly stormy night, the rain lashing against the windows, Kian found her by the glass, gazing out at the tempestuous city. The power had flickered, casting the vast apartment in an eerie, shifting light. He stood beside her, his presence a comforting warmth in the sudden chill. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper, carried by the wind howling outside. Alara turned to him, the dim light illuminating the vulnerability in her eyes. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Not just of him, but of what this all means. Of what I'm becoming." She gestured vaguely at the luxurious surroundings. "This isn't my life. I don't belong here." Kian reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. His touch was electric, a jolt that sent shivers through her. It was the first time he had truly touched her. And the intimacy of the gesture was overwhelming. "You belong with me, Alara," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His eyes, dark and intense, held hers, a silent promise in their depths. "No matter where that is." The words hung in the air, a potent declaration that both terrified and thrilled her. It was a confession, a claim, and a lifeline all at once. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She leaned into his touch, a silent surrender to the undeniable connection that had sparked between them. In that moment, surrounded by the storm outside and the quiet intimacy within, she felt a profound shift, a realization that her resistance was crumbling, replaced by a bewildering, dangerous attraction. Suddenly, a harsh, metallic clang echoed from below, followed by the muffled thud of heavy footsteps. Kian's eyes sharpened, the tenderness replaced by an immediate, dangerous alertness. He withdrew his hand, his body tensing, every muscle coiled for action. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." He moved with a silent, predatory grace towards the study, pulling out a hidden panel in the wall that revealed a sleek, black handgun. The cold reality of his world, the ever-present danger, crashed down on Alara with brutal force. This wasn't just a storm outside, it was a storm brewing within the walls of her gilded cage. She watched him, her heart in her throat, as he disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, leaving her alone in the flickering light, the sound of muffled voices and hushed movements growing closer. A sudden, jarring crash from the living room made her jump, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Her breath hitched. They were inside. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped her. She wanted to run, to hide, but Kian's words echoed in her mind, "Don't move." She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear, her senses heightened to an unbearable degree. Then, she heard it, Kian's voice, sharp and authoritative, followed by a series of angry, guttural shouts. A brief, violent struggle ensued, punctuated by heavy blows and the thud of bodies. Alara's mind raced, a terrifying montage of worst-case scenarios playing out. She knew she couldn't just stand there. She was no fighter, but she wasn't entirely helpless either. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for anything, any advantage. Her gaze fell on a heavy, ornate crystal vase on a nearby table. It was cumbersome, but solid. With trembling hands, she reached for it, her fingers closing around the cold, smooth surface. She didn't know what she would do, but she wouldn't just wait. Suddenly, the study door burst open, revealing not Kian, but a burly, menacing figure, his face obscured by a dark balaclava. He stopped, his eyes falling on her, a chilling glint of recognition in their depths. Well, what do we have here? He sneered, his voice rough and distorted. The boss's new toy. He took a step towards her, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Alara tightened her grip on the vase, her knuckles white. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of terror and a burgeoning, desperate resolve. This was it. The moment she had been dreading, the moment her new life collided with the brutal reality of Kian's world. What happened in that moment changed her destiny forever. Alara raised the heavy vase, her arm trembling, but her gaze fixed on the intruder. Stay back, she warned, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. The man scoffed, taking another step, his eyes glinting with a predatory amusement. Feisty, aren't we? Kian always did have a taste for the spirited ones. He lunged, swift, brutal movement, but Alara was ready. She swung the vase with all her might, aiming for his head. He ducked, the crystal whistling past his ear, but the unexpected resistance made him pause. Just then, a shot rang out from the hallway, followed by a grunt of pain. The intruder flinched, his attention momentarily diverted, and in that split second, Kian appeared in the doorway, his handgun raised, his face a mask of cold fury. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. Kian fired again, and the intruder stumbled back, clutching his arm, a dark stain spreading across his jacket. Get out! Kian roared, his voice laced with a raw, dangerous edge Alara had never heard before. The man, clearly outmatched and injured, glared at Kian, then at Alara, before turning and disappearing back into the hallway, his heavy footsteps echoing down the stairs. Kian didn't pursue him. Instead, he lowered his weapon slightly, his eyes sweeping the room, then settling on Alara. The immediate danger had passed, but the tension in the air was still palpable, thick with adrenaline and unspoken fear. He crossed the room in a few swift strides, his gaze intense, searching. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice rough with concern. Alara shook her head, still clutching the vase, her chest heaving. No. I'm fine. She looked at the handgun in his hand, then back at him, the reality of his world crashing down on her once more. This wasn't just a game, it was life and death, and she had just been a hair's breadth away from becoming a casualty. Kian gently took the vase from her trembling hands, placing it back on the table. His touch was soft, reassuring, a stark contrast to the violence that had just unfolded. It's over, he murmured, his thumb brushing against her knuckles. You were very brave, Alara. The compliment, unexpected and sincere, brought a strange comfort amidst the chaos. She looked into his eyes, seeing not just the formidable boss, but the man who had risked his life to protect her. The vulnerability she had glimpsed earlier was now fully exposed, a raw, protective instinct that resonated deep within her. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the incident left an indelible mark. The penthouse, once a symbol of her gilded cage, now felt truly like a sanctuary, defended by Kian. In the aftermath, Kian became even more vigilant, his protectiveness intensifying. He rarely left her side, and when he did, Lena was always present, a silent, watchful shadow. Their forced proximity, born of necessity, began to chip away at the remaining walls between them. They spent hours in the study, Kian working on his laptop, Alara reading from the extensive collection of books, the quiet hum of the city outside a constant backdrop. They spoke little, but their silence was no longer awkward. It was comfortable, intimate, a shared understanding that transcended words. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the panoramic windows, painting the room in hues of gold, Alara found herself watching Kian. He was engrossed in a document, his brow furrowed in concentration, a stray lock of dark hair falling across his forehead. He looked less like a fearsome boss and more like a man burdened by immense responsibility. She felt a strange pull, a desire to understand the complexities of his world, the weight he carried. Kian, she began, her voice soft, breaking the comfortable silence. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, a flicker of surprise in their depths. Why me? Why go through all this trouble for someone you barely knew? He closed his laptop, his gaze unwavering. Because you saw something you shouldn't have. Because you were exposed to my world. And because I don't leave loose ends, Alara. His words were pragmatic, logical, but she sensed a deeper meaning, a layer of emotion he was reluctant to reveal. But you could have just made me disappear, she pressed, her voice barely a whisper. Given me a new identity somewhere far away. A shadow crossed his face, a fleeting glimpse of pain. Perhaps, he admitted. His voice low. But I didn't. And now, it's too late for that. He rose from his chair, walking towards her, his presence commanding, yet gentle. He stopped just inches away, his gaze holding hers captive. After what happened, they know you're important to me. A weakness, they think. But they don't understand. His hand reached out, his fingers gently tracing the curve of her jaw, a feather-light touch that sent shivers through her. They don't understand that you are not a weakness, Alara. You are a part of me now. The confession hung in the air, potent and overwhelming. It wasn't a declaration of love, not in the traditional sense, but it was a profound acknowledgement of their intertwined fates, a promise of unwavering protection, a claim that resonated with a primal intensity. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She leaned into his touch, her eyes searching his, seeing a depth of emotion she had only glimpsed before. The resistance she had clung to for so long finally crumbled, replaced by a bewildering, dangerous acceptance. She was falling, irrevocably falling, into his world, into him. The next few days were a blur of heightened awareness. The incident with the intruder had sent ripples through Kian's organization, and he was working tirelessly to consolidate his position, to eliminate the threat. She saw the strain in his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw, even during their quiet evenings together. Alara found herself offering him cups of tea, sometimes just sitting beside him, her silent presence a small comfort in the storm. She was no longer just a protected guest, she was an unwitting participant in his life, and an increasingly vital one. One evening, Kian received a call that visibly disturbed him. His face, usually so composed, tightened, and a muscle in his jaw twitched. He spoke in hushed, urgent tones, his words sharp and clipped. Alara watched him, her heart sinking with a premonition of danger. When he finally hung up, he turned to her, his eyes dark with a grim resolve. There's a situation, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, yet she could feel the underlying tension. A meeting. Tonight. It's sensitive. He paused, his gaze lingering on her. I need you to stay here. Under no circumstances are you to leave this penthouse. Lena will be with you. Do you understand? His tone was a command, leaving no room for argument, but his eyes held a plea, a silent request for her. Understanding. Alara nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. I understand, she whispered. She wanted to ask questions, to know what kind of danger he was walking into, but she knew he wouldn't tell her. His world was one of secrets and shadows, and she was still an outsider, albeit one he was fiercely protecting. As he prepared to leave, a wave of unease washed over her. She found herself reaching out, her hand gently touching his arm. Be careful, she said, her voice barely audible. Kian's gaze softened for a fleeting moment. He covered her hand with his touch warm and reassuring. Always, he promised, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Then, he was gone, leaving Alara alone with Lena in the vast, silent apartment, the weight of his absence a heavy burden. Hours crawled by, each minute feeling like an eternity. The city lights outside seemed to mock her anxiety, twinkling with an indifferent brilliance. Lena, ever watchful, sat quietly in the living room, her presence a constant reminder of the unseen dangers lurking outside. Alara tried to read, to distract herself, but the words blurred before her eyes. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, sent a jolt of fear through her. She paced the living room, her mind replaying Kian's words, his grim expression, the silent promise in his eyes. What if this meeting was a trap? What if he didn't come back? The thought sent a cold shiver down her spine. She realized, with a startling clarity, how deeply he had embedded himself in her life, how much she had come to rely on his presence, his strength, his quiet protectiveness. She cared for him more than she had ever dared to admit. Even to herself. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Just as despair began to set in, a sudden, sharp ring of the intercom startled her. Lena was instantly on alert, her hand moving to a discreet earpiece. After a brief, whispered exchange, Lena looked at Alara, a rare, almost imperceptible hint of relief in her usually stoic expression. "He's back," she announced, her voice calm. Alara felt a wave of profound relief wash over her, so intense it almost brought her to her knees. She rushed to the door as it opened, revealing Kian. He looked tired, a faint bruise blooming on his cheekbone, but his eyes, though weary, held a triumphant glint. He was alive. He was safe. Without thinking, Alara launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest. She felt the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart, and for a moment, all the fear and anxiety of the past hours melted away. Kian, surprised by her embrace, held her tight, his arms circling her, pulling her closer. He rested his chin on her head, inhaling the scent of her hair, a sigh escaping his lips. It was a moment of raw, uninhibited emotion, a silent testament to the bond that had formed between them. "I was so worried," she murmured, her voice muffled against his shirt. He pulled back slightly, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs gently brushing away a stray tear. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I told you, I always come back," he said, his voice a low rumble, filled with a warmth that sent shivers through her. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a soft, tentative kiss that spoke volumes. It was a promise, a confession, a silent acknowledgement of the undeniable connection that bound them. The kiss deepened, a slow burn that ignited a fire within her. Her hands found their way to his hair, her fingers tangling in the soft strands, pulling him closer. It was a kiss of relief, of longing, of a love that had blossomed in the most dangerous of circumstances. When they finally broke apart, breathless, their eyes met, a shared understanding passing between them. The world outside, with its dangers and its shadows, faded away, replaced by the quiet intimacy of their embrace. The next morning, the city felt different, brighter, as if the storm had finally passed. Kian, though still bearing the faint bruise, seemed lighter, a weight lifted from his shoulders. He explained, in broad strokes, that the meeting had been successful, that the immediate threat had been neutralized, and that his position was now stronger than ever. The relief was palpable, not just for Alara, but for the entire household. The tension that had permeated the penthouse for weeks began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism. The days that followed were filled with a fragile peace, a calm after the storm. Alara found herself settling into a routine that, while still unconventional, felt increasingly like home. She spent her mornings exploring the vast library, losing herself in stories that offered a temporary escape from the lingering shadows of Kian's world. In the afternoons, she often found Kian in his study, engrossed in his work. The quiet hum of his laptop, the rustle of papers, and the occasional soft sigh from him became the soundtrack to her new existence. Their conversations grew more frequent, more intimate, no longer confined to the necessities of her protection. They spoke of art, of history, of the subtle nuances of human nature, topics that allowed Alara to see past the formidable boss and glimpse the thoughtful, intelligent man beneath. Kian, in turn, began to share snippets of his own life, carefully curated anecdotes that hinted at a complex past without revealing its brutal truths. He spoke of his childhood, not with bitterness, but with a detached observation, painting a picture of a world where survival was paramount and trust a luxury. Alara listened, her heart aching for the boy he must have been, the man he had been forced to become. One evening, as they shared a quiet dinner, the city lights twinkling like scattered diamonds. Outside the panoramic windows, Kian looked at her, his gaze unusually soft. "My mother, she loved opera," he began, his voice a low, almost wistful murmur. "She used to play records for hours. I hated it then, the dramatic wailing, as I called it. But now, sometimes I hear a piece, and I remember her. Alara saw a flicker of raw vulnerability in his eyes, a window into the deep-seated pain he so carefully concealed. She reached across the table, her hand gently covering his. She must have been a beautiful woman, she said, her voice filled with empathy. Kian nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. She was fiercely independent. Much like you. The comparison, unexpected and heartfelt, sent a warmth spreading through Alara's chest. It was a subtle acknowledgement of her strength, her spirit, a recognition that went beyond her role as a protected guest. Their bond deepened, woven from shared silences, whispered confessions, and the undeniable current of attraction that hummed between them. The physical tension, once a simmering undercurrent, now threatened to boil over. Every brush of hands, every lingering glance, every shared breath became an electric charge, a silent promise of something more. Alara found herself craving his touch. His presence, the way his eyes would soften when he looked at her. She was no longer resisting, she was actively leaning into the dangerous allure of Kian and his world. One afternoon, as Alara was sketching in the living room, a hobby she had rediscovered in the penthouse, Kian walked in, a rare, troubled expression on his face. He held a small, antique locket in his hand, its silver tarnished with age. This belonged to my mother, he said, his voice unusually strained. It was stolen from me years ago, during a difficult time. He paused, his gaze fixed on the locket. It was just returned to me. A message. Alara looked at the locket, then at Kian, a sense of foreboding washing over her. A message from whom? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kian's jaw tightened. From an old enemy. Someone I thought was long gone. Someone who knew this locket was important to me. He looked at her, his eyes dark with a chilling realization. He knows about you, Alara. He knows you're here. The fragile piece shattered, replaced by a renewed sense of dread. The locket, once a symbol of Kian's past, was now a harbinger of renewed danger. Alara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The threat wasn't just to Kian anymore, it was to her. Directly and personally. She was no longer just a witness or a protected individual, she was a target. Kian's protectiveness intensified tenfold. Lena was constantly by her side, a silent sentinel, and Kian himself rarely left the penthouse. The luxurious apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage again, but this time, the bars were made of fear. One evening, as Alara was preparing for bed, she heard hushed voices from Kian's study. Peeking out, she saw Kian and Lena in a tense conversation, their faces grim. She couldn't make out the words, but the urgency in their tones was unmistakable. A few minutes later, Kian emerged, his expression a mask of grim determination. He walked directly to her, his eyes holding a conflict she hadn't seen before. Alara, he began, his voice low and serious. There's a new development. A significant one. My enemy, he has made a move. He's targeting one of my key operations, a distribution hub on the docks. This is a direct challenge. He paused, his gaze intense. I have to go there tonight. It's too important to delegate. Alara's heart pounded. She knew what this meant. He was walking into a potential war zone. No, she whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for him. You can't go alone. It's too dangerous. Kian took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. I won't be alone. But the risk is high. This is what I do, Alara. This is my world. He looked at her, a profound sadness in his eyes. And this is where our paths diverge, for a short while. I need you to understand. I need you to trust me. He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. But I also need you to do something. For me. Something that goes against everything I've told you. Alara stared at him, bewildered. What is it? She asked, a tremor in her voice. Kian's grip on her hand tightened. If anything happens to me tonight, if I don't return, there's a contingency plan. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. Kian looked into Alara's eyes, his own reflecting a tempest of emotion she rarely saw. There's a safe in my study, he continued, his voice steady despite the underlying tension. Behind the large landscape painting. The code is my mother's birthdate, 0712. Inside, you'll find a sealed envelope. It contains instructions, contact numbers, and enough resources to disappear, to start fresh, anywhere you choose. Lena will help you. But you must promise me, Alara. If I don't return by dawn, you activate that plan. No hesitation. No looking back. Alara felt a chill creep up her spine, colder than any winter night. The weight of his words, the grim finality in his tone, pressed down on her. This wasn't just a contingency, it was a testament to the real, visceral danger he faced, and the depth of his commitment to her safety. Kian, she began, her voice cracking, don't talk like that. You will come back. He simply squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of her fear, but also a firm insistence on her understanding. Promise me, he repeated, his gaze unwavering. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, but she swallowed them back, forcing herself to meet his resolve with her own. I promise, she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He pulled her into a fierce embrace, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in his world, as if this might be their last moment. His lips found hers in a desperate, searing kiss, a silent plea, a promise of return, a desperate farewell all rolled into one. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were still dark, but a flicker of something akin to peace had settled in them. I'll be back, he vowed, his voice a low rumble. Against her ear. Then, he was gone, leaving Alara standing alone, the echo of his words and the phantom warmth of his embrace the only things keeping her tethered to reality. Lena, ever present, appeared silently beside her. He trusts you, Alara, she said, her voice softer than usual. He trusts you implicitly. The hours that followed were a torment. Alara paced the penthouse, the silence amplifying her fears. She imagined Kian in dark alleys, facing unknown dangers, the brutality of his world a stark contrast to the luxurious cage she occupied. The image of the locket, a message from a ghost, haunted her thoughts. She knew this was more than just a business dispute, it was personal, and it was deadly. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every distance sounded a potential harbinger of bad news. She found herself clutching the antique locket Kian had shown her, its cold metal a stark reminder of the threat. She traced its tarnished surface, a silent prayer forming on her lips for his safe return. Lena remained a silent, watchful presence, her stoic demeanor a small anchor in Alara's swirling anxiety. Around 3 a.m., a sudden, violent crash from somewhere below sent a jolt through the entire building. Alara gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. Lena was instantly on high alert, her hand moving to her earpiece, her eyes scanning the room. A muffled shout, then another crash, echoed faintly. What was that? Alara whispered, her voice trembling. Lena's expression was grim. Stay here, Alara. Do not move from this spot. Before Alara could protest, Lena was gone, moving with a swift, silent efficiency that spoke of years of training. Alara stood frozen, her blood running cold. The penthouse, once a symbol of safety, now felt utterly exposed. The sounds of conflict, though distant, were unmistakable. Footsteps, heavy and urgent, sounded from the hallway. Not Lena's light tread, but something heavier, more menacing. Panic seized Alara. She remembered Kian's words, his contingency plan. The safe. The instructions. Her mind raced. She couldn't just sit there, helpless bystander. She had to do something. She had to be ready. With trembling hands, she rushed to Kian's study, her eyes darting to the large landscape painting. She pulled it aside, revealing the steel safe embedded in the wall. Her fingers fumbled with the dial, inputting the numbers, 0-7-1-2. The click echoed loudly in the silent room, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, a single, thick envelope lay. Nestled amongst neat stacks of cash and a slim, encrypted phone. As she reached for it, the study door burst open. Alara froze, her hand still hovering over the envelope. Standing in the doorway was a man she had never seen before, tall and lean, with cold, calculating eyes and a cruel smile. He wasn't one of Kian's men. His suit was expensive, but there was an unmistakable aura of predatory menace about him. "Looking for something, love?" he sneered, his voice a low, gravelly growl. Alara instinctively recoiled, her heart pounding against her ribs. He was the enemy. Kian's enemy. And he had found her. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to project a courage she didn't feel. He took a slow, deliberate step into the room, his eyes raking over her with an unsettling possessiveness. "Let's just say I'm here to collect a debt. And you, my dear, are a very interesting part of that collection." He advanced, slowly, deliberately, like a predator stalking its prey. Alara's mind raced. Lena was gone. Kian was, somewhere else, fighting his own battles. She was alone. But she wasn't helpless. Kian had given her a mission, a promise. She would not break it. As the man took another step, Alara's eyes darted to the heavy marble bookend on Kian's desk. It was within reach. Her hand shot out, grabbing it, her fingers closing around its cool, solid weight. The man paused, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, replaced quickly by a mocking laugh. "Feisty, aren't we? I like that." He lunged, but Alara was faster. She swung the bookend with all her might, aiming for his head. He ducked, but the marble caught his shoulder with a sickening thud. He grunted, stumbling back, his cruel smile vanishing. "Bitch," he snarled, his eyes now blazing with fury. This was real. This was a fight for her life. Alara didn't hesitate. She threw the bookend aside, her gaze sweeping the room for another weapon, an escape route. Her eyes landed on the open safe, the envelope still within reach. That was her only chance. She lunged for it, her fingers closing around the thick paper. Pulling it free. The man recovered quickly, his pain turning into a cold, determined rage. He was faster than she anticipated, closing the distance in a terrifying blur. His hand clamped around her wrist, twisting it painfully, forcing her to drop the envelope. It fluttered to the floor, its contents spilling out slightly, a thick wad of cash, a small, burner phone, and a folded piece of paper. "Naughty, naughty," he whispered, his grip tightening, his face inches from hers. The smell of his stale cologne, mingled with something metallic, made her stomach churn. "Did Kian tell you to run?" "How touching." He wrenched her arm behind her back, forcing a gasp of pain from her lips. She struggled, kicking and twisting, but his hold was unyielding. He was stronger, heavier, and fueled by a chilling malice. "Let me go," she cried. Her voice raw. He merely chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Not a chance, darling. You're coming with me. Kian will be very motivated to negotiate for your return." He began to drag her towards the study door, his movements efficient, brutal. Just as they reached the threshold, a new sound ripped through the penthouse. A sharp, explosive crack that echoed like thunder, followed by a guttural cry. The man froze, his grip on Alara momentarily loosening. His eyes darted towards the sound, a flicker of uncertainty replacing his smug confidence. Alara seized the opportunity. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, she stomped hard on his foot, then headbutted him with all her might. He roared in pain, releasing her as he stumbled back, clutching his face. Without a second thought, Alara scooped up the envelope from the floor, clutching it to her chest, and bolted. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from him, away from this penthouse that had become a battlefield. She ran through the opulent living room, her eyes darting frantically for an exit. The main door was too far, and probably guarded. The panoramic windows offered no escape, only a dizzying drop to the city below. The sounds of struggle intensified, closer now. Shouts, the clang of metal, and another sharp crack that sounded terrifyingly close. Lena was fighting. Kian was fighting. This was a full-blown invasion. Alara spotted a service elevator, discreetly tucked away near the kitchen entrance. It was her only hope. She sprinted towards it, her heart hammering against her ribs, the envelope a lifeline in her trembling hands. She jabbed the call button repeatedly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The elevator light flickered, then dinged, its doors sliding open with agonizing slowness. Just as she stepped inside, a figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. It was the man from the study, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage, a thin trickle of blood running from his nose. He lunged, but Alara was quicker, slamming her hand onto the close door button. The doors began to slide shut, the man's furious snarl echoing as he reached for her. His hand slapped against the closing doors, missing her by mere inches. The elevator lurched, beginning its descent. Alara leaned against the cold metal wall, her legs threatening to give out, clutching the envelope so tightly her knuckles were white. She was out. For now. But where was Kian? Was he safe? Was Lena? The questions tore at her, a fresh wave of terror washing over her. She knew she had to follow his instructions, but the thought of leaving him, of running without knowing his fate, was unbearable. The elevator reached the ground floor, its doors opening into a deserted service corridor. Alara peeked out, her senses on high alert. No one. She moved cautiously, her eyes scanning for exits, for any sign of danger. The corridor led to a dimly lit underground parking garage, vast and eerily quiet. Rows of luxury cars gleamed under the sparse fluorescent lights. She needed to get out of the building entirely. The envelope contained instructions, a way out. She pulled out the folded paper, her eyes scanning the handwritten notes. It listed a rendezvous point, a safe house across town, and a contact name, Silas. A number was scrawled beneath it. She quickly found the burner phone and powered it on, her fingers clumsy with fear as she punched in the number. It rang once, twice, then a gruff voice answered. Silas. My name is Alara, she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Kian, he sent me. He said to call this number if he didn't return. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Where are you? Silas asked, his voice devoid of emotion. In the parking garage of the penthouse building, Alara replied, her eyes darting nervously. I think I'm being followed. Stay calm, Silas instructed, his voice now sharper, more urgent. Go to the third level down, section C. There's a black Mercedes-Benz S-Class. The keys are under the driver's seat. Drive it to the address I'm about to send you. Do not stop for anything. Do you understand? Yes, Alara. Breathed, already moving, her legs propelling her towards the ramp leading to the lower levels. The adrenaline was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, pushing her forward. She found the car, just as Silas had described. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. Her hands shook as she fumbled under the driver's seat, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the keys. She yanked them out, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a powerful, reassuring sound in the echoing garage. She threw the car into reverse, then sped out of the parking spot, her eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. No one seemed to be following her, at least not yet. The address Silas had sent was a series of numbers and a street name she didn't recognize, somewhere on the outskirts of the city. She drove, pushing the luxurious car to its limits, the city lights blurring into streaks of color. Each turn felt like an escape, each mile a step further from the nightmare she'd just endured. The silence of the car was a stark contrast to the chaos she'd left behind, but it offered no comfort, only amplified the terrifying questions in her mind. Was Kian alive? Was Lena? The thought of him, battered and broken, sent a fresh wave of fear through her. She clutched the envelope tighter, its contents a heavy reminder of his sacrifice, his desperate plan for her. The safe house was a modest, unassuming bungalow nestled in a quiet residential area, a stark contrast to Kian's glittering penthouse. It looked utterly normal, blending seamlessly with its neighbors. Silas was waiting for her, a tall, imposing figure with a shaved head and eyes that missed nothing. He was older than Kian, his face etched with the weariness of a man who had seen too much, but his presence exuded a calm, unwavering strength. He opened the car door for her, his gaze assessing, but not unkind. "Alara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Kian spoke highly of you." He led her inside, the house surprisingly warm and welcoming. There was a pot of coffee brewing, its aroma a small comfort in the suffocating anxiety she felt. "He's not back yet," she stated, her voice barely a whisper, a desperate plea for reassurance. Silas poured her a cup of coffee, his movement